Welcome back, everyone, to our business planning series.
Welcome back to The Financial Dad, the show where we ask our real dad, a certified financial planner, everything you need to know about starting a business. If you never learned it at school or at home, don't worry, because now you've got a financial dad too.
If you've been with us thus far, we've talked all about what is a business plan and everything that you need that goes into literally starting a business. We've taken our fictional example business called Brew Zone through every single step of a business plan so that if you're listening, you can understand what it actually takes. We've gone over USP, we've gone over marketing, we've gone over SWOT analysis, and today we're going to start talking about operations. And one thing that Dad, I want your opinion on it as well, but I just want to say this, that if you are a small business owner or if you are having a company online or if you're having a brick and mortar, some of what we share today is going to really differ based on the type of business you have. You might have a simple business, you might have a different kind of business. Anywho,
Yeah,
let's jump in.
yeah. It'll be completely different for every kind of business because each business markets, operates, interacts with the public, interacts with its financial partners, in different ways. So your operations plan has to take into account how you intend to operate for your business model and then figure out all the pieces that will be needed to function properly as a business.
How would you define operations and what should someone start thinking about?
Operations, I would define it as a series of processes that get you A, business, and B, fulfillment of the provision of your services or products to the business, to the clients, to the customers. So you talked earlier when we were offline about freelancers, for example. So if I'm going to be a freelance consultant of some kind, I'm going to market myself out to the public in some way. Then I'm going to have a process of selling to the public. So, I get a lead. How does that become a prospect? How do I communicate with the prospect? What do I say? Do I give them any materials during that process? So I have to have those materials ready. Then eventually, if they want to become a customer, do I have a contract for them? How do I deliver that contract to them? Am I going to use e-signature? Am I going to send them a paper contract somehow? How am I going to collect money from them? And then how will I actually deliver those services? Is it going to be by Zoom? Am I going to be traveling? How will all of that happen? Then finally, at the end of it, how will I gauge success or failure? Will I survey people? Will I not survey people? Will I ask for references or possible new client name opportunities from people? So that entire arc of trying to get a client to trying to get another client from a client, you could consider that operations. And pretty much every software you would think about, every piece of equipment you would think about, and personnel that will interface with the public. In general, all of that has to do with operations. So to take the Brew Zone example, okay, so now we've got marketing operations because we're going to try to get people in the door. So how will that operate? Who will operate it? With what frequency will we put out marketing of various kinds according to our plan? Then people come to the door of the store, presumably. From the time they come in that door, what happens? Do we have some special experience for them of some kind, or is it just plain? Do they smell something? Do they see something? Do they hear something? Is there ambient lighting or sound in the space? So have we created an experience once they walk in? How will they look and find what they're going to order? Once they're ready to order, how will we take that order? Once we take that order, what do we do with that order? How do we transfer that order to someone to fulfill that order? How do we take money from them to pay for the order? How do we get that money from some credit card merchant vendor into a bank account for us someplace? How does that happen? How do now the people that fulfill our product or service, how do they create the product itself? Do we have a process for creating a cup of coffee the way that we want it to be, or a latte, or macchiato, or whatever we're going to do? What is the process for that? How will we train people for that? Are we doing it a special way? What is our way, and how are we training for that? How will we deliver it back to the customer? Are we going to send them a text message when it's ready and they can come up and get it? Or are we just going to put it out on a counter with maybe there's a name thing that was printed out at the time of the cashiering? All of those steps are processes that encompass the main operations of the business. There are still other operations like how do we get financial information into a system of accounting of some kind? So, just as an example, there are other operating aspects to some businesses that aren't public facing. But all of these details have to be thought through. And everything that you conceive of in your mind as being how the business actually functions to fulfill, its mission has to be planned out. And you have to budget for all of those items, create a budget, whether it's a startup item or an ongoing item. All of that has to be built out into a financial model so that you can see whether, what's affordable, what's not, and what's sensible and what's not, perhaps. Because the example of the China set, as opposed to disposable coffee cups of some kind, the China set creates a whole new set of requirements for the business in terms of personnel, operations, equipment, regulatory, health code kind of stuff. You got to make a decision whether you think that's worth going there for whatever the benefit is that you think having actual china or cups and saucers, would bring you. So this is operations is kind of where the rubber meets the road of detail.
Mm. It sounds
You
like
know,
there's so much to think through. You really just kind of have to go through the ins and outs of the experience from the minute someone walks in the door and just think about everything. I feel like this
right,
is probably the point in the process where bringing in other people to help you brainstorm is probably helpful because it might be hard as one person to like try to think of every single thing.
yeah. Well, and this is also where having experience in a business of a similar kind comes into play because there will be equipment that you're not familiar with as a layperson that a person who has managed or worked in a brew store would be familiar with, like a little blender that mixes latte, or you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. If you have no experience with how that works, you might not even think about that kind of equipment and that it's necessary. Also, where other people, Hallie, to your point, can come into play is I would say two things. One, running these thoughts and these processes by other people before you actually buy a piece of equipment or get that far down the road so that they help you think things through. They remind you of something you may not be thinking of, etc. That's critical. And then definitely, assuming you get the business off the ground and you're almost ready to open the doors, you want to test these processes before you open the doors with actual clients. So sometimes people have what they call a soft opening. You invite your friends and family and people who are very favorable to you. And in part, what you're doing is a test run, a beta test of sorts of the operations of the business. Okay, how do the people work together behind the counter? Did we put the cups in the right place where it's going to be efficient to grab them and fill them with coffee? Just little tweaks like that can make a lot of difference in the workload of people. How far away are the supplies when we need something new? If we're really busy and we need to open up a whole new bag of cups, do I have to walk 50 feet away to a closet somewhere, get a bag, bring it back, open it up and get started, as opposed to can I store that a day's supply somewhere where the people work with it so that they never have to step away from the station, to resupply something like that. So there are just a lot of things to try to think through and imagine in your head. And then, of course, all of it has to be in line with what you are pitching as your unique sales proposition. So if quality service is part of that, white glove service, you have to figure out how many people are going to be behind the counter and how many people it will take to provide white glove service. Because if you market it that way and price it that way and don't deliver on that, you're dead in the water.
Yeah.
Right. So everything that we've talked about in terms of the marketing and the USP and what that experience is that you plan to deliver that's going to be unique and is going to be competitive has to now come to fruition.
Yeah,
Has to now
and
happen.
follow through on your word. Well, and it's funny, I think what you said about thinking about the customer's perspective and the senses, the things that they're going to experience, like what they're going to see, smell, hear. I didn't even think about the fact that music and ambiance is really important to your experience of a space, right? So obviously we're going to need speakers. Like we're going to need some sort
Yes.
of sound system. And I don't think that would have come to mind super quickly. So I think that
Yeah.
keeping in mind, yeah, their five senses of like what they're going to experience in that space is actually a really helpful way to go through. And also a way to see if they're going to get the experience, like you said, that we've promised.
Yeah. So if ambient lighting is going to be a part of it, well, how will that happen? What instruments, what lighting instruments do you need? You're not going to get regular fluorescent bulbs in the ceiling and get ambient lighting.
Definitely not
So,
fluorescent.
all of that has to be thought through and meticulously. If you really want to do it well, you have to be meticulous about it, very detail oriented. Some people are not, by the way, built for this.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like, I am a less meticulous person in general. I'm a big picture person. And I only know about this stuff from years of dealing with it and having made the mistakes of not having been meticulous about it. This is where you also grow as an entrepreneur. When you have a weakness somewhere, you either got to work on that weakness to get it to make it better, or you got to find somebody who can completely replace you when it comes to that thing, who doesn't suffer from your weakness and is able to complement your skill set rather than you just sucking at it and doing a bad job. But yeah, operations, you need to be very organized, keep a lot of to-do lists, what equipment needs to be purchased and how frequently. When you purchase equipment for a business, keep an inventory of it. Who was the supplier? Where did we get it? How did we get it? What did we pay for it? Because at some point, that piece of machinery may go out on the fritz. You may need to replace it. And you don't want to start the process of finding that equipment from ground zero, especially if you're happy with the equipment, if it was well priced, a good vendor supplied it. You want to be able to open up a kind of like an operations binder of some sort and say, okay, that blending machine, we got it from Joe's whatever, costs about $300, and I know I can get it delivered in 2 days. That's a lot faster than starting the process of finding that piece of equipment from scratch.
So my mind goes to, okay, what technology or what softwares can help a business owner keep track of this kind of stuff? Question number one, is that dependent on industry? And question number two, are people like writing this down just on paper? Like, if I have a business, I don't want to just write down that I bought Joe's coffee machine in 1985. Like, how do business owners stay up with the times?
Yeah. Well, okay. So there are multiple moving parts of managing the business, quote unquote, operating the business. Okay. So for marketing, you may have a software of some kind that helps you manage your prospect or customer list. By the way, just as a matter of process, when someone comes in and pays, are you going to ask them to take a name and an email address somehow so that you can put them on your list? You may have to incentivize them to do that by, if you do this, every fifth coffee is free for the next month, or something like that, right? So you're going to need a software that can handle that piece of the business. You're going to need software that will handle payment, cashiering, the totaling, the sales tax aspect of it, delivery costs, all those kinds of things that connects to the little card reader type machines. You're going to need, again, some sort of accounting software that will help you manage that aspect of the business. And from an operations standpoint, any sort of organizing program, it could be a project management software that you just keep things in. It could be an Excel spreadsheet. It depends upon the complexity, I would say. So certainly for a freelance business, if you bought your computer, you get your Wi-Fi or internet, maybe you have the equipment for podcasting, and you've got, Zoom and things like that. You do want to try to keep that all somewhere that you could find it quickly if you have a problem. Zoom stops working. Is there a phone number for Zoom? Or if you're having trouble with your CRM that helps you, customer relationship management software, who was the vendor? How do you contact them? Some of those kinds of things. If you're that organized at the startup, everything just goes a lot more smoothly when you run into problems going down the road.
That makes sense. There's definitely a lot to think about. And I think what we can do for everyone listening, we will kind of list some of the things below in this video in the description so that you have just in your mind some of the things that you can be sorting through when it comes to the operations of your business.
We hope that you are enjoying figuring out your operations plan. And if you take your time and really think things through, you shouldn't have a problem. If you're enjoying this series, please like, subscribe, and comment down below anything you would like to know or anything you want further clarification on. We're always reading the comments, and we hope to see you in the next one.